I first met Harry during my second year of university. It was one of those coincidental things. Our paths just crossed naturally. We were both sitting in the campus cafe, a little hole-in-the-wall spot where you could grab a quick coffee and escape the chaos of class schedules. I remember glancing up from my laptop, trying to piece together an assignment I had procrastinated on, and there he was, sitting across the room. Something about him caught my eye instantly. We bumped into each other later that week at a mutual friend's party. That night, the alcohol flowed a little too freely, and I ended up chatting with him for hours. It wasn't just small talk either. We connected. We talked about music, our plans after graduation, how exhausting life could feel even when we were young. Harry had this dry sense of humor that always had me laughing at the most random things. He was easy to talk to, and we quickly became close. I guess you could say we just clicked. It wasn't long before we were hanging out regularly, studying together, grabbing lunch between classes, or catching late-night movies. He became one of my closest friends, someone I trusted and enjoyed being around. But back then, I never thought much about it beyond friendship. He had that easy charm, someone everyone liked, and for a while, we were practically inseparable. College ended though, and life pulled us in different directions. He got a job in another city, and we lost touch. That connection we had slowly faded as the years passed. Years passed, and Harry became a distant memory, one of those friends you remember fondly, but rarely think about as life moves forward. I had settled into my routine, work, the occasional night out with friends, and hitting the gym a few times a week to stay in shape. It was on one of those random gym visits, during an ordinary Tuesday evening, when I saw him again. I had just finished a set of weights and was heading toward the treadmills when I caught sight of someone familiar. At first, I didn't recognize him. Harry had changed. He was taller, broader, his once slim frame now turned with muscle, and there was a confidence in his stride that hadn't been there before. But that same light brown hair, still falling messily across his forehead, and those eyes. I couldn't mistake them. It was Harry, without a doubt. I wasn't sure if he recognized me. After all, it had been years, and I wasn't the same either. My once longer hair was now cut short, and my face had matured with the passing of time. But as soon as our eyes met across the gym, a slow smile spread across his face, and I knew instantly that he remembered me too. "Long time no see," he said, walking over as casually as if no time had passed at all. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but there was still that same warmth in it. "Harry," I laughed, shaking my head in disbelief. "I thought I'd never see you again." We stood there for a moment, just taking each other in. It felt surreal, like time had folded in on itself, and suddenly, we were back in university, two young guys without a care in the world. We caught up quickly, exchanging stories about where we'd been and what we'd been up to. He had moved back to the city recently after a rough breakup and was trying to get his life back on track. I told him about my job, my own challenges, and how much had changed since we last spoke. The conversation flowed as easily as it had years ago, and before I knew it, we were making plans to grab a drink after our workout. It was like no time had passed at all. The weeks that followed our unexpected reunion at the gym felt like a whirlwind, a sudden rekindling of the friendship that I hadn't realized I missed so much. Harry and I started hanging out more regularly, meeting for drinks, hitting the gym together, or just catching up at a local cafe, just like the old days. It felt natural, easy, like we were picking up right where we left off. But the more time we spent together, the more I noticed that Harry seemed off. At first, I thought it was just the aftermath of his breakup. He had told me in passing that it had been a rough one. But it wasn't just that. He looked stressed, distracted sometimes, even though he tried to hide it behind his usual smile and laid-back demeanor. One evening, after a long gym session, we decided to grab dinner at a small restaurant nearby. The conversation was light at first, talking about work, our usual banter. But I could tell something was weighing on him. Harry kept checking his phone, his eyes flicking away from the conversation, as if something else was on his mind. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. As the meal went on, I noticed how tired he looked, the way he leaned back in his chair, eyes a little darker than usual, his shoulders slumped as though carrying a weight I couldn't see. I tried to focus on what he wasn't saying, piecing together the fragments from previous conversations, the casual mentions of his ex, the fact that he was looking for work, the subtle hints about money. It became clear that he was struggling, though he wasn't the type to admit it outright. It dawned on me that his living situation was far from stable. The breakup had left him scrambling to find a place to stay, and rent prices in the city were no joke. Harry had always been someone who preferred to deal with things on his own, avoiding any kind of help unless absolutely necessary. But I could tell by the way he carried himself that things were starting to slip through his fingers. As I sat across from him, watching him push food around his plate absently, the solution seemed obvious to me. I had more than enough space at my place, a spare bedroom that was collecting dust, and I knew that if I offered, it would take a huge burden off his shoulders. It was a practical solution, and deep down, I couldn't stand the thought of him going through this alone. So, without hesitation, I decided to offer Harry a place to stay. I knew he would resist at first, but I also knew how much this would help him. It wasn't just about giving him a roof over his head. It was about giving him a break from the constant stress and pressure he was clearly under. Harry moved in a few days after our dinner. I hadn't expected the transition to be so seamless, but it felt right. He settled into the spare room easily, his presence somehow filling the house with a comforting energy. I worked long hours during the week, and while I was out, Harry took on the role of keeping things in order. It wasn't something I asked for, but he started cleaning up, cooking meals, and making my house feel more like a home than it had in a long time. After long days at the office, I'd come back to find a warm meal waiting, the smell of home-cooked food filling the air. It was a welcome change from my usual solitary routines of takeout and exhaustion. Harry never made a big deal out of it, he just did it. It felt natural, like an unspoken agreement between us, a rhythm we'd fallen into without ever needing to discuss it. In many ways, it felt like we were coexisting effortlessly. The boundaries between housemate and close friend blurred in a way I didn't question. It was simply easy. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed that kind of companionship until it was there, quiet but constant. He brought a certain warmth to the place, and I found myself looking forward to coming home more than I ever had before. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, I came home completely drained. Harry, as usual, had made dinner, a simple pasta dish, and we ate together while watching some mindless TV, our usual routine. The weight of the day was catching up with me fast, and before I knew it, I was slouched on the couch, half asleep. Harry was beside me, and the comfort of his presence made it easier to relax. The quiet hum of the television in the background was soothing, and my mind started to drift. But something shifted that night, something I hadn't expected. As I lay there, half-conscious, feeling the haze of sleep creeping in, I sensed Harry moving beside me. It was supple at first, a gentle shift in the way he was sitting, but then I felt his hand, slowly and deliberately, reaching for the waistband of my pants. I was too tired to react, my mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. Part of me thought it was a dream, that I'd imagined it. But the warmth of his hand was undeniable, sliding under the fabric, his touch both tentative and assured. My breath hitched, but I didn't pull away. I didn't stop him. I'd never considered myself anything but straight. Not once had I thought about Harry, or any guy, in this way. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. I was too tired to think, too exhausted to resist, and before I knew it, I was giving in to the sensation. His hand moved expertly, his touch careful and deliberate, and despite the confusion swirling in my mind, I couldn't deny the pleasure. It washed over me in waves, unexpected but undeniable. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that I didn't mind. In fact, I wanted it. I wanted the release, the closeness, the way it made the weight of the day melt away. There was no room for thought, no space for questions, only the feeling of his hand, the warmth of his touch, and the slow build of pleasure that left me breathless. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and despite the strangeness of it, I couldn't stop it. Harry never said a word. He didn't ask, didn't hesitate. He just did it, and I let him. When it was over, I lay there, too stunned and too drained to say anything. The TV continued to hum in the background, and Harry sat beside me, calm and composed, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had changed. Something between us had crossed a line, and as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't deny that I had liked it. The morning after that night felt surreal. I woke up early, still groggy from sleep, but the memory of what had happened between Harry and me on the couch lingered in the back of my mind, like a vivid dream I couldn't shake. The way his hand had moved, the sensation of letting go so easily, it all felt like a blur, but it was undeniably real. For a moment, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what it meant. My thoughts were all over the place. I had never imagined myself in a situation like that with another man, let alone Harry, my best friend. But instead of feeling guilt or confusion, there was a strange sense of calm. I couldn't stop thinking about it, how right it had felt in the moment. And even now, as I lay in bed, the memory of it stirred something in me, something deeper than just the physical pleasure I'd experienced. It was as though a part of me had been awakened, a part I didn't even know existed. There was no shame, no regret. If anything, I found myself wanting more. When I finally pulled myself out of bed and headed to the kitchen, Harry was already there, casually sipping on a cup of coffee like it was any other day. His expression was unreadable, and he didn't bring up what had happened the night before. There was no awkwardness between us, no tension hanging in the air. It was as though the line we had crossed was unspoken, but acknowledged. I half expected him to act differently, maybe even apologize or brush it off as a mistake. But he didn't. He was just Harry. The same calm, confident presence he always was. As the day went on, we didn't talk about it. In fact, we went about our routine like normal. He worked from his laptop in the living room while I headed off to work. But I couldn't focus at the office. The memory of his touch stayed with me, growing more persistent as the hours ticked by. I found myself replaying the moment over and over in my head, the warmth of his hand, the way my body had reacted, the sensation of letting go completely. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I wanted it to happen again. I didn't know what this made me. Was I gay? Was I bi? I had never questioned my sexuality before, but now everything felt like it was shifting beneath me. And yet, there was no fear, no anxiety, just curiosity, desire. I found myself fantasizing about what it would be like to feel Harry's touch again, to see how far this connection could go. By the time I got home from work, the anticipation had built up inside me like a slow-burning fire. I knew I wanted more. I wasn't even sure how to approach it, whether Harry felt the same way, or if he'd simply been acting on impulse that night. But deep down, I sensed that he did want more, that the line we'd crossed wasn't just a one-time thing. That evening, after I'd showered and changed into more comfortable clothes, I found Harry in the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, fresh out of his own shower. I stood there for a moment, watching the steam rise from his body, his skin still damp, glistening under the bathroom light. There was a tension in the air now, a charged atmosphere between us that hadn't been there before. Without saying a word, I stepped closer to him, my heart racing in my chest. It felt like I was crossing a threshold, stepping into the unknown, but I didn't hesitate. As soon as I reached him, I closed the distance between us, and our lips met in a slow, tentative kiss. It was soft at first, almost cautious, as if we were testing the waters, but it quickly deepened. His mouth was warm and inviting, his hands sliding around my waist, pulling me closer. The kiss ignited something inside me, something raw and powerful. I felt myself getting lost in the moment, my hands exploring the contours of his body, the warmth of his skin under my fingertips. Harry responded in kind, his touch growing bolder, more insistent, and before I knew it, we were pressed against each other, our breaths heavy and ragged. Then, without breaking the kiss, Harry knelt down, his hands sliding down my hips, and I could feel the anticipation building as he tugged at the waistband of my pants. What followed was a rush of sensation I wasn't prepared for, his mouth, warm and skilled, taking me in. The pleasure was overwhelming, intense in a way I had never felt before. My entire body tensed with the sheer intensity of it, and I couldn't help but let out a low groan, my hands gripping the counter behind me for support. It was too good to resist, too good to question. I surrendered to the feeling, letting him take control, my mind lost in the moment. All the doubts, all the questions about what this meant, none of it mattered anymore. All I cared about was the pleasure, the connection, the unspoken understanding between us. The days after that encounter in the bathroom were a whirlwind of emotion and confusion, but also something else, something deeper and more intense that I couldn't quite name at the time. Harry and I had crossed a line, that much was clear. But what struck me the most wasn't just the physical connection we had shared, though that was impossible to ignore. It was the way everything between us felt different now, and yet strangely familiar at the same time. I remember waking up the next morning, the weight of the previous night still heavy in my thoughts. There was no denying it anymore. What had happened between Harry and me wasn't just an impulsive moment. It was something more. The way my body reacted to him, the way I couldn't stop thinking about it, it was as though a switch had been flipped inside me, something I had never known existed until now. Harry didn't mention it when we saw each other that morning, but there was a new energy between us. An unspoken understanding that what we shared wasn't just about lust or curiosity. We went about our day like usual, but the tension between us lingered, electric and undeniable. Every time our eyes met, I could feel it, a pull, a magnetic force drawing us closer, even when we weren't touching. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I kept replaying the events in my mind, not just what we did, but how it felt. There was a warmth in my chest whenever I thought about it, a desire that went beyond the physical. I found myself craving his presence, wanting to be near him, to feel that closeness again. It wasn't just about the sex, it was something more profound, something that felt dangerously close to love. By the time I got home that evening, the weight of my thoughts was nearly overwhelming. I had to see him to figure out what was happening between us. And when I walked through the door, there he was, Harry, sitting on the couch, casually flipping through the TV channels as though nothing had changed. But I knew, and I could see in his eyes that he knew too. This time there were no words, no awkward attempts to explain what we were feeling. I crossed the room and sat next to him, and without hesitation he leaned in, our lips meeting in a kiss that felt deeper, more urgent than before. It wasn't tentative anymore, it was full of intent, of want, of need. His hands were on me in an instant, pulling me closer, and I responded with equal fervor, my body already aching for the touch I had been thinking about all day. But something shifted as we kissed, something that went beyond the physical connection. It was in the way his fingers gently brushed the back of my neck, the way he pressed his forehead against mine between breaths, our eyes locked in a moment of raw vulnerability. There was a tenderness to it, something that spoke of more than just desire. It felt like trust, like understanding, like love. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just some strange experiment or a one-time experience. This was something more, something I wanted. It hit me all at once. This wasn't just some fling or experimentation. This was real. The feelings I had for Harry, the way my heart raced whenever I saw him, the way I craved his presence, this was more than I'd ever felt for anyone. It was deeper, more intimate. And the realization that I had fallen for him, my best friend, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The rest of that evening was a blur of sensation and emotion. We didn't rush things. There was no urgency like the nights before. This time, it was slower, more deliberate. We took our time, exploring each other with a new sense of purpose, a shared understanding that this was something we both wanted, something we both needed. When it was over, we lay together, his arm draped over my chest as we both caught our breath. The silence between us was comfortable, warm, as though words weren't necessary anymore. I turned to him, and the look in his eyes said it all. He felt it too. Whatever this was between us, it wasn't just a phase or a moment we would forget in the morning. It was something that had been building for a long time, something neither of us had acknowledged until now. We had crossed a line. There was no going back now. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel scared or confused. I felt content, as though everything had finally clicked into place. And as we drifted off to sleep that night, tangled up in each other, I realized that I didn't care what labels this would bring or what it meant for my future. Harry wasn't just my best friend anymore. He was the person I loved.